Men say that old age is the price one pays for having had the privilege of existing, but I have walked paths where that idea dissolves like fog before the first ray of dawn, and I have sensed at the heart of things a truth that refutes that judgment, accepted without question. What if that price was never legitimate? What if everything we have believed about the passing of the years has been nothing more than a great collective hypnosis, woven from the first breath on this plane and fueled by every chime of the clocks that preside over our world? This book is not born from a certainty, but from a stubborn suspicion, a luminous wound that refuses to heal and beats like a silent reminder. Youth, I have told myself, is not a fleeting privilege granted to the body, but an untouched flame that dwells in the depths of the soul, a glow that has never been extinguished, even though oblivion has tried to cover it with ashes. It is not a dream or a romantic consolation for those who fear wrinkles, but a revelation that rests at the very center of being, where neither dust nor time can settle. Since ancient times, this memory has been veiled. Doctrines have hidden it, dogmas have disguised it, and those fearful of inner freedom have distorted it beyond recognition. Because remembering who you are is not a childish nostalgia, but a radical act of spiritual rebellion. It is peering into the abyss and realizing that you were never what the mirror or the calendar tried to portray to you. The ancient texts whispered of this, though few dared to read them aloud. In the scrolls of the Laria Valley, a resplendent figure warned the illusory builders of this world, "I am not born of dust, but of light. Time does not nest in me. The soul does not bow down for redemption, for it is already eternal." It declares its origin, affirms its intact memory. For calendars were written to mark decay, mirrors were carved to measure the distance between what we were and what we were commanded to accept. But who wrote that history? Who decided that the flesh must surrender to a number? Certainly, it was not the soul. The ancient sages, whose names were lost like dry leaves in the drift of the centuries, spoke of this luminous heresy. A fragment rescued from the Ancharis Codex read, "Age is a spell. The body submits when the soul sleeps." And later, the alchemist Silvanos of Meron whispered to his disciples, "The lead of the flesh turns to gold when the inner fire awakens." He was not referring to concoctions, ointments, or elixirs that would prolong the smoothness of the skin, but to a forgotten alchemy, a secret biology of the spirit, an art of remembering the immutable. And if that ancient flame could be rekindled, if, by contemplating it, cells and thoughts, organs and emotions were reordered around that primordial vibration, would that not be true rebirth? The sages of the Himalayas, hidden in the caves of Agartha, spoke of the luminous, those who did not march toward death, but were kept alight from within, like lamps sustained by emptiness. And the Chaldean papyri whisper of the Nasiri, the twice-born. Their second birth occurred when the memory that had never known sunset was awakened. This book is not a compendium for preserving the body's freshness, or a guide to outsmarting the years, but rather a map to the fire that sustains all forms. It is not intended to stop time, but rather to remind us that time never began at the core of true being. Here we speak of the essential, of that which has no beginning because it has never been matter, of that which still burns within you, even though the ashes have made you forget its warmth. Contemporary science is beginning to whisper what the ancients sang loudly. It discovers that thoughts can renew tissues, that the body obeys the image we hold of ourselves. They call it the placebo effect. They call it a psychosomatic phenomenon. But the sages of old called it the memory of the spirit. If a thought can wear us down, if a fear can sicken us, why shouldn't a certainty heal? Why shouldn't it reverse, rebuild, transfigure? This is the foundation buried beneath millennia of fear and convenience. And whoever approaches these words should not seek youth in their own skin, but in the flame that never ceased to shine. Because the young soul should not appear so. It must recognize itself. And that act of remembering is an act of power. Just as alchemists didn't crave gold for adornment, but as a symbol of their own inner perfection, you're not here to relive your 20s, but to avoid eternity with every breath. This isn't a poetic figure. It's a reality truer than marble, more alive than blood. Prepare yourself, reader, because in these pages you won't find arguments, but rather fire. We won't talk about longevity, but incorruptibility. Not appearance, but essence. And if there's even a spark left inside you that remembers that it didn't come to this world to grow old, but to burn eternally, then you haven't found this book. It has found you. Beyond time, beyond form. Before continuing with the video, if you want, the truth of youth is in this forbidden book. I recommend you look at the first link in the description. Chapter 1. The First Lie. And so the invisible chain was perpetuated. Parents teaching their children to fear the years. Doctors recording numbers as diagnoses. Artists depicting beauty only in youth. Poets mourning the loss of youth as if it were an exiled and dead god. But few dared to question the root. Why grow old? Why accept that the downward curve is inevitable? Who decreed that after the rise must come the fall, and not perhaps another form of ascent? The ancients knew, and a few still remember, that existence is not linear. It is a spiral that rises and falls at the will of those who know how to govern its center. In the esoteric schools of Alexandria, it was said, "He who remembers is reborn. He who forgets repeats." And in that lost memory lies true youth, not that of muscles or smooth skin, but that of intact vibration. The fear of old age is not the fear of deterioration, but the fear of oblivion. Because when the body withers, but the consciousness remains intact, the miracle happens. The wise old man whose gaze contains the clarity of a child. That brilliance is what false architects fear, because it cannot be sold, cannot be managed, does not submit to calendars or control diets. It is a free fire. Since ancient times, civilizations have erected obelisks, calendars, sundials, and hourglasses not only to measure time, but also to anchor the human mind to a rigid perception of time. Those who count minutes forget eternity. Thus was born the apparent condemnation of old age, as a collective suggestion, an unconscious agreement signed at birth. But what happens when someone awakens? When a single spark refuses to accept that the flame of their soul will wither? When they understand that their essence was not born in time, and therefore cannot die within it? Then the game breaks. The Chaldean texts called it the reversal of the decree. These manuscripts speak of those who walk among mortals, but do not obey their invisible laws. It's not that they live eternally in the flesh, but rather that they remember eternity in life. And that memory transforms the body, not through superficial chemistry, but through essential vibration. Every thought uttered with conviction is an order to the invisible field that sustains forms. When you say to yourself, "I am aging," you command your cells to wither. When you repeat, "I am losing strength," you instruct your organs to diminish their vigor. But if instead you pronounce, "The unspoiled flame burns within me, and its radiance renews my flesh," the subtle structures reorganize. It's not fantasy, it's forgotten science. Today, neuroscience is just beginning to discover that the adult brain can regenerate, that stem cells exist throughout life, that DNA responds to the emotional and mental environment. But the ancients didn't need laboratories. They knew this from direct experience. In the retreats of the Himalayas, in the deserts of Persia, in the hidden temples of Egypt, the art of prolonging life without submitting to time was practiced as a sacred act. The Hindus called it Kaya Kalpa, the alchemy of the immortal body. The Druids spoke of the green ray, the eternal vibration that can rejuvenate matter. And in the Hermetic lodges, it was repeated, "Time obeys those who know it." It's not about stopping the clock, but about ceasing to obey it. It's about turning each day not into a stepping stone toward death, but into a circle that returns to the center, where age is irrelevant and the soul dances. Therefore, this book won't ask you to deny the passage of time, but rather to remember that the passage of time is a stage, that your deepest identity isn't measured in wrinkles or anniversaries, but in lucidity, in presence, in the intensity of your inner fire. And if even now, as you read these lines, you feel a different vibration, a spark that says, "Yes, I wasn't born to grow old. Don't extinguish it." Because that is the original memory that has been hidden behind centuries of suggestion. Old age is not a punishment or an inevitable consequence. It's an accepted hypothesis, and every hypothesis can be refuted. Thus, the journey continues. In the coming chapters, we will reveal the signs of that hidden flame, the forgotten practices that not only halt the illusion of decay, but also reshape matter in the image of eternity. For it is not the body that ages, it is belief that withers it. And when belief dissolves, the body obeys the light. Chapter 2. The False Crown of Time. From the first dawns of the world, when man still recognized himself as part of a vastness he didn't understand, but did feel, there was a whisper that slipped through the folds of the wind and the fallen leaves. That whisper came not from the gods or the ancestors, but from a will that longed to master what should never have been possessed, the living consciousness of eternity. Thus was born what the ancients called the illusory crown of time, an invisible diadem placed upon the forehead of every man and woman at birth, woven not of stones or metals, but of numbers, calendars, marked days, birthday parties, and the whispers of those who unwittingly repeated the incantation, "You are so old already. At this age you should..." Time is unforgiving. But that crown wasn't a sacred ornament. It was a shackle, a delicate, subtle rope that bound the spirit to the repetitive dance of clocks, cycles, and seasons, until it was convinced its destiny was to deteriorate, until it forgot it had come from a place where nothing withers. The wise men of old, those who walked barefoot on the earth because they knew that feet remember paths the mind has forgotten, whispered in forbidden tongues that true old age begins not in the skin or bones, but in the instant one accepts that there is an end. Decrepitude is a consequence of thought, not biology. The body, they said, is obedient to the image the soul holds of itself. Thus, in the smoke-filled halls of the ancient desert, in the cold sealed caves of the White Mountains, and in nameless temples where only those who had already died entered the world, a science older than medicine and more precise than mathematics was taught, the science of remembering. Remember what? Someone reading these words might ask, their heart still wrapped in inherited logic. Remember that the flesh is a sacred vessel, but not eternal, and yet not condemned either. That within each cell a spark slumbers, an ember burning since the dawn of time, waiting for the right word, the right deed, the precise silence to awaken it. That's why, the guardians of the fire said, there are ages not measured by calendars, but by the brightness of a gaze and the lightness of a step. There are 80-year-old men whose hearts burn with the indomitable impulse of childhood, and children who have barely opened their eyes to the world and are already walking, dragging invisible chains inherited from their ancestors. Time, they taught, is not an enemy, but a faithful servant. But it becomes a tyrant when its true nature is forgotten. It was not made to wear down, but to command, not to imprison, but to teach. Those who understand this do not age, not because their faces do not wrinkle, but because their essence does not shrink. There is a hidden story that is never told in schools or written in official books. It tells of an ancient people whom they called the Shadowless, because they left no trace of the passing of time on their bodies. They had no calendars, and the concept of age was unknown to them. They recognized each other by the power of their song, by the depth of their dreams, and by the light emanating from their words. Each one knew when their time to leave had arrived, not because their body had betrayed them, but because their mission had been fulfilled. These men and women were not affected by nostalgia or fear of the end. They lived in a continuous present, where youth was not a state of the flesh, but a perpetual flash of the awakened soul. The false architects of reality, upon discovering this secret, hurriedly concealed it. They then designed clocks, calendars, anniversaries, and control systems that transformed age into an emotional rather than a physical structure. Because they knew, and feared, that a man who is not afraid of aging fears nothing. Thus, a perfect illusion was created. Birthdays were celebrated, achievements and failures were associated with numbers, the seed of expectation was sown, and the fruit of resignation was reaped. Mirrors ceased to be portals and became judges. And anyone who dared to look young at 60 or fall in love at 70 was regarded with suspicion, like someone who violated an unwritten law. But that law isn't real. It was only written in the dust, and like everything written in the sand, it can be erased. This chapter isn't meant to convince you, reader. It's not meant to impose an alien truth on you. It's simply meant to remind you that at some point, before you were named, before you learned to count the years and candles on a cake, you knew you were eternal. That you could be a child, an old man, and a warrior in a single day. That the only valid unit of measurement for your existence was the intensity with which you embraced each moment. If you've made it this far, it's because that memory still vibrates in some corner of your blood. Perhaps you've denied it. Perhaps you've covered it up with the borrowed clothes of society. But it's there, throbbing, waiting for its owner to claim it. I invite you then to close your eyes, to search in the inner darkness, not for the memory of your childhood, but for the pure sensation of having existed before the first number, before the first word, when you were only a presence. And once you find it, don't let go. Make it grow. Call it what you will: eternal youth, sacred flame, incorruptible spirit. It doesn't matter. The important thing is to remember that you weren't born to burn out, but to ignite. Just as the old oak contains young sap in its highest branches, you contain in every heartbeat the same spark that lit the stars. Chapter 3. Time does not dwell in the soul. There is an ancient teaching, whispered in the recesses of the invisible world, that says, time is a habit of the mind, not a law of the spirit. And yet, the men and women of this plane have lived chained to their calendars, their clocks, and their farewell rituals, like those who accept that the tide must always drag everything toward its dissolution. But what is forgotten, and what is more serious than any other error, is that the soul does not transit the same seasons as the body, nor is it governed by the logic of the days. There is something in you, yes, in the one who now holds these words with the eyes of silence, that has never aged. No matter how many winters you have gathered in the folds of your skin, or how many times you have watched the evening fade over the fields of your childhood, something remains unchanged, intact, like a seed of light that no darkness has managed to extinguish. The wise men of old, those who conversed with the stars and listened to the teachings of the wind, said that the greatest deception of this world was to convince man that life is consumed. And not because the flesh doesn't follow its course, but because the true journey has never been that of the body. Instead, consciousness glides along timeless paths, a pilgrim of the eternal, and there are no ages, only degrees of remembrance. Long before people gave time a name, there were already those who knew how to stop it. They did so not through sorcery or artifice, but through a simple and luminous understanding. Time only exists when it is acknowledged. In the solitudes of the deserts, among the whirling dervishes and the Toltec elders who conversed with the moon, it was taught that every thought a human being holds about himself can nourish or dissolve his prison. The child feels immortal because he doesn't know how to count the years. He doesn't fear the future because he hasn't been taught to name it. And there, in that uninjured innocence, lies one of the forgotten keys. He who doesn't measure his life cannot lose it. But as the voice of habit grows louder, like persistent rain on a docile earth, the veils adhere. They tell you when you should laugh, when you are expected to grow up, when you can no longer indulge in certain dreams. They are sown in the soul like seeds of rust that, when germinated, fabricate the false notion that decline is natural. And yet, something inside resists. There are moments, between dawn and wakefulness, when you vaguely remember that before all this, you were different. You are ageless in those ancient dreams where you walk weightlessly, where the word pain had not yet been invented. Perhaps that's why, when you look at a starry sky or hear a certain melody that seems to come from nowhere, a nameless nostalgia comes over you, because you recognize, without knowing how, that you belong to another region. The mistake has been to accept that the visible dictates the laws. But every mystic knows that the visible is merely a stage set, and that behind this curtain of appearances vibrates the immutable, real, where there are no clocks or seasons, only the pulses of eternity. There are those who have managed to cross that border. There is a story of a man in the Anatolian mountains who didn't know the calendar, and when he died, the local elders claimed he hadn't aged a single day because he never believed in death. There is also talk of a woman in the Amazon rainforest who, upon understanding this secret, stopped bleeding, stopped turning gray, and her gaze retained the transparency of a bottomless lake until she voluntarily said goodbye to the body, like someone taking off a coat. Modern science has begun to touch upon this truth, guarded by ancient wisdom. It has been discovered that cells respond more to internal signals than to the external reckoning of time. What ages is not the body, but the programming imposed on it. Thoughts, those small daily prayers, are the architects of the flesh. If you tell yourself, "I am fragile," every morning, your body will obediently adjust. If you believe that everything declines with age, your cells, like fearful children, will accept that command. But if you remember instead that you were born before your time, that you come from a lineage of stars who know no wear and tear, something will begin to change. It won't be immediate or spectacular, because the ice of oblivion doesn't melt with a breath. But the fire that ignites from within never goes out again. And that's where true rejuvenation lies. Not in appearance, but in vibration. A being that vibrates at its original frequency doesn't age. It just changes shape. Like water, which can be a river, a cloud, or rain, without ceasing to be water. Perhaps then, the time has come to dismantle this ancient fraud, to shed the inherited names, the imposed dates, the handed-down judgments, to remember that you are not your story, nor your achievements, nor your failures. You are the consciousness that observes them. That consciousness has not been born, and therefore cannot die. When you discover that, there will be no fear in you, because you will have crossed the final frontier. And in that moment, you will know that youth is not a period of life, but a state of mind. It is then, and only then, that you understand that you are ageless. You have eternity. Chapter 4. The Echo of Forgotten Names. There are truths that slumber beneath the earth like ancient seeds, waiting for the moment when consciousness awakens and its gaze once again rests upon the inner heavens. And one of those truths, perhaps the most forgotten by the passage of human time, is that the soul was never a name. What lips pronounce and documents record are only distant echoes of an identity that cannot be captured by signs or dates. Before being called, you were. Before answering to a name, you inhabited eternity without labels. The sages of old, the desert wanderers and guardians of the sacred forests, held that each soul was a fragment of a primordial fire that knows no expiration. But upon descending to this plane, upon crossing the invisible thresholds that separate the worlds, it receives names as one receives garments, cloaks that cover its essential nakedness to travel among men. And each name brings with it a story, a wound, an expectation, a veil. These names are not only those assigned to us at birth, but also those we accept throughout our lives. Guilty, weak, strong, failed, successful, loved, forgotten. Every word we have believed, every judgment we have allowed to enter the sanctuary of the Spirit, becomes a scab stuck to the skin of the soul. And so, without realizing it, we cease to be what we are and become what others have chosen to name us. But there is a moment, fleeting like the flash of a firefly in the woods, where something resists. It can happen when looking into the face of a sleeping child, when listening to an ancient melody no one remembers composing, when contemplating the horizon lit by a silent twilight. In those moments, the soul murmurs from deep within, "I am not this." And that phrase, faint but immense, is the beginning of a return. In books that no one has wanted to read because they fear their truth, there is talk of the art of unnaming. The ancients said that whoever remembered their name first, the name before the name, would regain their essential freedom. They weren't referring to a hidden word or a mystical secret written on some scroll, but to the intact vibration that resides at the center of every being. A vibration that is neither sound nor concept, but a wordless certainty. For the people who walked alongside the wind, forgetting that inner echo was always true exile. They said that the soul is not lost in death, but in oblivion. And oblivion is not a casual amnesia, but a sustained act, a daily surrender to what seems more solid, more urgent, more tangible. Thus was woven the great collective veil that covers men, the one that makes them forget that they were born immortal in spirit. Legends tell of men and women who could, in the middle of the night, hear their original name resonate in their chests like an ancient drum. Hearing it, time stopped. Their bodies grew younger, and the memories of their entire lives danced before them like golden leaves in a swirling wind. They were the rememberers, those who did not submit to the dictatorship of calendars or inherited definitions. They taught that no human being ages because they change their appearance, but because they forget who they are. And if the soul doesn't age, but rather accumulates veils of forgetfulness, then the only real task is to remove those attached names, those words that weigh more than stones. But doing so isn't shouting to the world that one has changed. It isn't proclaiming new titles or assuming other, more refined masks. It's a silent task, like someone peeling back the layers of an onion without boasting about it, in the sacred solitude of one's conscience. Each false name shed leaves the soul lighter, closer to its original splendor. Some achieve this through art, others in the silence of a formless meditation, some in the pain of a loss that uproots certainties. All paths lead, in some way, to the same fire. Because that fire isn't external, it isn't given by a teacher or a book. It has always burned in the core of who you are. It's the reason why, even as your body ages and the days pile up, there's a part of you that remains intact, immune to the years, untouched by defeat. The mystics called it the divine spark, the seed of eternity, the unchanging essence. And if you could remember that now, not from your mind, but from your core, you would understand that you are ageless, that all the names you've ever worn are disguises you can abandon on the shore before crossing the invisible bridge into that which never dies. That echo you hear in dreams, that certainty that emerges when all else falls silent, is the voice of that which has not been touched by time. Allow yourself to follow it. It doesn't matter how many veils cover your soul today, or how many names have been imposed on you. A single instant of true fire is enough for the ice of the centuries to melt. And in that thaw, names dissolve, calendars vanish, and only the eternal remains. You were, are, and will be. Youth of spirit is not a matter of appearance or ability, but of memory. Not of memorizing facts, but of remembering your essential nature. And whoever remembers becomes light. Not a light that shines outward, but an inner flame that recognizes its own face in the darkness. Time is a tale we learn to obey. The soul, on the other hand, doesn't count hours. It breathes eternities, and it only waits for you to call it by its true name. Chapter 5. The Echo of Invisible Forms. There is a moment, subtle and silent, where thought ceases to be an idea and becomes a form. Not a form that the eyes can grasp or the hands can possess, but a vibratory architecture that shapes the invisible substance of destiny. The universe, in its primary language, understands not words or concepts, but vibrations. Everything that is conceived in the intimacy of consciousness spills like a perfume over the vastness of the all. Imagine a drop of ink falling into the center of a serene lake. From that point of contact, concentric circles are born, incessant, traversing the surface until they kiss the most distant shores. This is how authentic thought operates, like a wave that travels through the subtle planes until it finds its reflection in matter. There is no act more creative than that first impulse. And yet, in the whirlwind of days, we forget that every idea is a gesture toward the eternal. The ancient sages said that the universe is sustained by the unspoken word and the unscattered thought. They knew that the noise of the everyday mind, full of worries, borrowed desires, inherited fears, obscures the true voice, the one that speaks in the secret language of the heart. It was at the school of Elora, a monastery hidden among mountains of jade, that initiates learned to listen to that primordial whisper. There, they were taught that everything visible is a consequence of an invisible cause, and that mastering the current of thoughts was the only true alchemy. It wasn't about imposing a superficial will, but rather tuning into the essential current, like a navigator who understands the winds and doesn't fight against them, but sets his sails according to their direction. Among his teachings was a proverb so ancient that no one remembered its origin. He who tames his mind tames the sky. He who scatters it flounders among empty forms. Because everything we call life, success, failure, health, or decline, is merely the crystallization of thoughts held in secret. What is visible is always a belated echo of what has already occurred in the invisible realm. But what makes a thought become creative? It's not enough to imagine, just as it's not enough to name to possess. The key lies in vibration, in the coherence between what is thought, what is felt, and what is believed. Only when these three currents unify into a single channel does the universe respond. Otherwise, ideas float like aimless clouds, unable to precipitate into action. In one of the forgotten texts of the Alexandrian Hermeticists, they speak of internal concordance, a state where thought, word, and emotion align with the certainty of one who does not doubt. They maintained that this state is not achieved through force, but through a sweet surrender to the certainty of the eternal. The most powerful thought is that which knows itself to be one with its source, they said. It's not about thinking to control the world, but about remembering that we are already part of its infinite breath. When the being recognizes itself not as a separate observer, but as a conscious cell in the limitless body of the whole, thought ceases to be an effort and becomes a natural extension of the spirit. The soul, in its origins, didn't think in words. It perceived, vibrated, remembered. The veils imposed by centuries of cultural domestication transformed that pure perception into chains of concepts. We were taught to name before feeling, to define before living. But there is a previous language, a language of vibrations that is spoken without being spoken. The birds, the water, the wind through the trees remember it, and the soul remembers it too, in moments of absolute silence, when the tide of alien thought ceases and only the echo of the essential remains. In ancient traditions, it was said that old age begins when one forgets one's creative power, not when wrinkles appear, but when one begins to believe that the exterior determines the interior. True rejuvenation occurs when we recover the art of creating from within, when we stop passively accepting the flow of the world and relight the lamp of lucid thought. Every thought is a silent decree. and every decree is an offering to time or eternity. Because if you think from limitation, you create invisible walls. If you think from the eternal, you open portals in the fabric of destiny. The question then is not what you think, but where you think from. From inherited habit or from the awakened heart. There were those who understood. In the deserts of Nubia, it is said that the wanderers of the starry night managed to halt the deterioration of the body and the sadness of the soul simply by aligning their thoughts with the vibration of the constellations. This was not magic, but spiritual science. They knew that anything that remains in resonance with the higher realms cannot sink into the lower realms. Likewise, in the secret gardens of Samhara, the sages meditated each dawn on a single idea. I am eternal, and my form is my reflection, not my prison. And by repeating it, not as an empty slogan, but as a living certainty, they modified the very texture of their bodies. The elderly did not age, because they had understood that only that which forgets its source ages. Today, even in this time of noise and haste, every soul keeps that flame intact. It only waits to be remembered. It only awaits a moment of silence, a gesture of return, a look inward. There's no need to retreat to the mountains or learn extinct languages. All it takes is to stop, to breathe, and in that wordless space, to once again smell the forgotten scent of divinity. Because before names, before ages, before wounds and glories, there was a spark. And that spark is you. Neither old nor young. Neither broken nor whole. Only eternal. Before continuing with the video, if you want, the truth of youth is in this forbidden book. I recommend you look at the first link in the description. Chapter 6, The Invisible Programmers. In the beginning, when the earth had never known calendars or clocks, there was already a restlessness in the air. That feeling, suspended between the visible and the invisible, called for something to be counted, for the passage of eternity to be marked. It wasn't primitive man who sought to measure the flow of life, but the mind, influenced by unseen forces, began to weave a network of numbers, an invisible map of time. Time, as we understand it today, is not a product of our imagination. It is not the creation of human hands, but a deeper design, implanted without our realizing it. It is a structure found not only in clocks and calendars, but in the way we view our lives, in how we structure our existence. The idea of linear time, advancing from one point to another, is a secret programming, an invisible current that guides our every step. The sages of ancient times, those who understood the essence of the universe, never spoke of time as something divine. For them, it was not a gift from the cosmos, but a veil that separated the soul from its origin. In the forgotten writings of the Gnostics, a scenario is described where archons, dark entities, invisible in their nature, created illusory worlds. The trick of these architects was to make everything seem like it had a beginning and an end, and in doing so, they made us forget our eternal nature. Time, then, became the barrier that separated us from what we truly are, infinite, eternal beings. The archons weren't demons walking among us. They weren't clawed monsters, but shadows projected into our minds, altering our perceptions. Their work wasn't outright destruction, but subtle suggestion, the creation of thoughts that appeared natural. Their art was so refined that we didn't even notice their presence. Time was implanted in our lives as a need for control, as a need to categorize every aspect of our existence. And so, we began to measure life, not by the experience it gave us, but by its duration, as if the beauty of a moment depended on how many seconds preceded or followed it. And youth, which is merely a state of being, began to be seen as a limited period, destined to disappear. The illusion is woven this way. We believe that life is a staircase, ascending to a certain point, and then descending in inevitable decline. But where does that voice come from that whispers in our ears, that marks the passage of time, that turns every wrinkle into a sign of loss? It's not the voice of the soul. It's not the voice that sings deep within us. That voice is that of a system that was inserted into us, a structure that made us forget the true nature of life. The invisible archons, with their mental programs, didn't need to dominate our bodies, but rather our perception of time. They knew that if they succeeded in enslaving our minds, they could distance us from the truth that lives within us. We were taught that time is an enemy, that youth is a treasure to be lost, that old age is an inevitable condemnation. We were told that there is a moment when life fades, that there is a beginning and an end. And so, human consciousness began to live under the rule of the clock, always ticking, always in a hurry, always looking to the future and forgetting the present. But what happens when we stop? What happens when we stop measuring and begin to live without the weight of time? In the secret Gospels, lost in the mists of the centuries, we speak of an act of spiritual rebellion. Those who dared to break away from counting found the vibration that never fades. This phrase, lost in history, speaks to us of an awakening, a return to the deepest truth. It is no longer necessary to follow the calendar sequence, no longer necessary to count the days as if they were rosary beads. The soul does not belong to that system. The internal calendar, imposed on us from childhood, is a mental structure that teaches us to see life not as a flux, but as a cycle that must be closed. From birth, we are taught to count the years, to measure time by foreign rules, to celebrate what is gone rather than what remains. Spiritual systems themselves have been contaminated by this view of time. The aging sage is rewarded, but the living wisdom of the child who is unafraid of eternity is forgotten. Fulfillment, the ancient Gnostic texts teach, is not measured by years lived, but by abandoning the external world and returning to the center of being. Linear time was implanted so that we would forget our true nature, so that we would fear the future and lament the past. We were taught to live with the burden of decline, to see every wrinkle as a defeat, to celebrate the years as if they were enemies. But the reality is different. True time is not a line, it's a spiral. With each turn, something is remembered, something is transfigured, something is reborn. Ancient peoples knew this, and that's why they didn't count years as a succession of events, but as cycles that complete themselves, like circles that open and close. The mind that lives without a calendar is a free mind. It is dangerous to the system because it has no need for goals or objectives imposed by time. That mind connects with the present, with the now, and in its deep connection with the self, it rejuvenates. It doesn't worry about the passing of days because it isn't tied to them. It inhabits the present without measure, without needing to mark time. A mind that is not enslaved by the pressure of clocks and calendars is in a state of continuous renewal. The inner clock, which was implanted to make us forget our eternity, no longer has power over the soul. The body can keep pace with life, but the soul does not age. And when we awaken, when we stop and look within, the light that dwells within us is remembered. Time loses its power, and the soul emerges from its hiding place, full and luminous, to live in eternity. Chapter 7. The Call of the Void. In the vast silence of the universe, there is a space where words cannot reach, where thought dissolves and consciousness finds its peace. It is a void that is not essentially empty, but a space filled with infinite possibilities. It is the place where creation begins, where the soul remembers its deepest purpose. It is the echo of the universe that resonates within every being, a vibration that cannot be touched, but is felt in the depths of the heart. It's curious, then, that in a world that so values fulfillment, the accumulation of knowledge, wealth, and achievements, emptiness is so feared. We often seek to fill it with things, with people, with occupations, believing that in this way we will find peace. However, what we ignore is that emptiness is the space where everything can emerge. It is the darkness before the light, the silence before the word, the space where being finds itself. In this emptiness, truth is not imposed. It is revealed. It is not a truth that can be taught, nor a truth that can be grasped by the mind, but a truth that is lived, experienced from the depths of one's being. Perhaps the greatest truth of all is that we don't need to know everything or have all the answers. Life itself guides us, teaches us, reveals to us, as long as we are willing to listen. Human beings, in their constant search for control, have built systems of beliefs, ideas, and mental structures that have disconnected them from that original emptiness. In their eagerness to understand and define, they have filled their world with noise, with empty words that attempt to give form to what cannot be understood. But the true path to awakening lies not in accumulating knowledge, but in stripping away all that is not essential. The void is not absence, but pure presence. It is the place where the mind dissolves, and being merges with the whole. And when the soul immerses itself in that void, in that sacred space, it begins to understand that it is not separate from the universe, but one with it. In that instant, the boundaries between being and non-being vanish, and all that remains is an infinite expanse, a continuous flow of energy and light. Many, when faced with this emptiness, feel overwhelmed. They fear nothingness. They fear not knowing. They fear losing control. But paradoxically, it is only when we surrender to this emptiness, when we abandon the desire to control, when we let go of everything we think we are, that we begin to truly live. Because life is not in the doing, but in the being. And being, in its purest form, is being in emptiness. It is inhabiting the present without expectations, without judgments, without anxieties. This emptiness, far from being a space of despair, is the place where creativity and inspiration flourish. It is the fertile ground where ideas, dreams, and visions are born. In the stillness of the void, the soul connects with its deepest wisdom, with the universal truth that lies beyond the limited mind. Some souls, throughout their lives, feel the call of this emptiness. It is a silent whisper that comes from the depths of their being, a longing to return to that primordial space where all things are possible. It is a call that cannot be ignored, even though many do. The emptiness is there, waiting patiently, knowing that only when we are ready can we embrace it. Only when we let go of clinging to forms, definitions, and expectations can we enter its presence. But to reach this emptiness, to immerse oneself in it, it is necessary to let go. To let go of fear, to let go of limiting beliefs, to let go of the ego that tells us we must be something, that we must do something, that we must have something. Emptiness has no expectations. It doesn't judge. It needs nothing. It is just there, waiting for us to approach it without fear, with an open heart and a silent mind. It is in this space of emptiness that we truly find our strength. Not in the noise of the outside world, not in the voices telling us who we should be or what we should do, but in the inner silence that reveals our true nature. Only in emptiness can we see clearly. Only in emptiness, where everything dissolves, can we witness the creation and rebirth of our soul. As the soul delves into this sacred space, it realizes that there is no separation between itself and the whole. Everything that exists is in constant transformation. Everything is part of an eternal cycle that follows no rules of time or space. The void is the beginning and the end, the source and the destination. It is the cosmic dance that never ceases, an endless movement, an unending flow of love and light. In this emptiness, the soul finds peace. Not a peace dependent on external circumstances, but a peace that is intrinsic to its being. It is the peace that comes from knowing that all is well, that all is perfect just as it is. It is the peace that comes from understanding that we are not separate from the divine, but are an extension of it, a reflection of the universal light. And it is then, in this emptiness, that the soul begins to remember. It remembers who it is, where it comes from, and where it is going. It remembers its connection to the universe, to everything. And, finally, it understands that there is nothing to fear. Because emptiness is not the end, but the beginning of everything. It is the space where everything begins, where everything is renewed, where everything is possible. Thus, in the call of emptiness, the soul finds itself, not because it has sought it outside, but because it has found it within. And when this happens, when consciousness expands and the self dissolves into totality, life becomes a game of infinite creation, an eternal dance between being and non-being. Chapter 8. Silence as a bridge to the eternal child. Silence is the space in which the soul remembers itself, not as a whisper of the past, but as a deep vibration that awakens what has always lain dormant at the heart of our being. When we immerse ourselves in the noise of the world, we lose connection with that primordial stillness, that stillness that is not empty, but charged with all possibility. The mind wanders, and we become trapped in thoughts that follow one after another, unaware that, in their incessant flow, they drown out the inner voice that, in its purity, already knows all. In ancient traditions, it was taught that true wisdom is not found in accumulating knowledge, but in learning to listen to silence. Silence, far from being emptiness or absence, is the womb where deep understanding is gestated. In this space, the eternal child remains awake, intact, waiting to be rediscovered by the soul that forgets it in its attempt to become something it is not. The fact is that external life, which pushes us to always be busy, to achieve, to be recognized, creates an illusion that we need to be someone, that we need to prove something. But the deepest essence of being doesn't need to be demonstrated. It doesn't need external recognition or the applause of others. Eternal youth is achieved not by retaining a youthful appearance, but by liberating the eternal child at the center of our being. The eternal child is unaffected by the ages of the body because its being is beyond time. It doesn't age, not because it refuses maturity, but because it has freed itself from the weight of the world's expectations. And it is in silence that this child awakens, where its presence is not merely a fantasy, but a living, tangible reality, experienced in the depths of one's being. When the soul connects with silence, it attunes itself to that original vibration that precedes even words and thoughts. This silence is not the void of inaction, but the fertile ground where creation germinates. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus, known for his reflection on the constant flow of life, affirmed that the soul finds itself in a state of eternity when immersed in the flow of being. However, we rarely pause to listen to this flow. Instead of being aware of the incessant current of life, we allow ourselves to be carried away by the waves of thought and action, losing touch with the calm that resides beyond the surface of our mind. The eternal child is not afraid of the flow. They are one with the river of life, not because they control it, but because they play with it, without resisting it. They are not afraid of being swept away, because they know they will always be part of the current. This is the essence of the child, an absolute trust that everything is part of a cosmic game, where the self is not an object to be controlled, but an energy to be experienced in its entirety. In play, there is no effort, no struggle, only a flow born from connection with the deep self. The eternal child does not need to earn love, abundance, or life itself. They simply accept them for what they are, divine gifts already present within them. The soul that encounters the eternal child within is like a child playing with the stars. It doesn't worry about the direction of the game, nor what it might lose in the process. The richness of its being depends not on worldly achievements or material possessions, but on the connection with that pure essence that resides beyond roles and expectations. By rediscovering the eternal child, the soul begins to remember its essential nature, which cannot be touched by age, illness, or death. In Christian tradition, the kingdom of heaven is compared to the innocence of children. In his teaching, Jesus calls us to return to the purity of heart, to the simplicity that connects us to the divine. The eternal child is a symbol of this purity, of that presence that needs no adornment, no justification. The soul that has forgotten this purity finds itself trapped in the constant search for external meaning. But the truth is not in the future, nor in the past. The truth is in the here and now, in the present moment, where the eternal child plays without reservation, without fear. Just as a child plays with the objects of the world without much distinction, the soul that has awakened to the eternal child finds itself capable of touching the world without being contaminated by anything. It can walk lightly on earth, seeing in every moment an opportunity to laugh, to create, to be. And in that play, true abundance is found, because the eternal child does not seek wealth, but experience. And in experience, it finds fulfillment. But society, like a turbulent ocean, has created a tide that pulls souls under, preventing them from seeing the reflection of the eternal child. We are taught to look outside, to seek the answer in material things, in external achievements. The eternal child, however, is an answer born from within. It is a reminder that being need not be defined by the world, but is defined by its connection to the source of life. When the soul connects with this source, when it remembers its true nature, time loses its power. Youth is not measured by years, but by the ability to be present in the moment, to play with the flow of life effortlessly, without resistance. The soul that remembers the eternal child is rejuvenated because it lives not to accumulate, but to experience the beauty of existence itself. And when the child awakens, life ceases to be a series of tasks to be completed and becomes a sacred play. This play is not superficial or frivolous. It is a profound play, an act of creation in which the soul dances with the universe. True transmutation begins when the mind and body cease imposing restrictions on the being and allow the eternal child to take control. The eternal child is, ultimately, the essence of being, the pure soul free from the chains of time. It is the divine spark that never goes out, always ready to illuminate the path of awakening. And to find it, we need only stop looking outside, stop analyzing life, and simply surrender to the experience of being, like a child who doesn't need to understand everything, but is willing to play with everything. Chapter 9. The Soul as Creator of Abundance. Abundance is not a concept that can be measured with the eyes. It is not found in the glitter of coins, nor in the golden surfaces of material goods. Abundance is a state of being, an internal vibration that arises when the soul remembers its creative power, its infinite capacity to manifest the divine in all forms of life. The soul, when aligned with its deepest essence, knows no limitations. It lives in constant fluidity, in the same dance that the eternal child plays with the universe, without fear of losing or gaining, simply being. At the very core of every being lies a divine spark that knows no scarcity. Abundance doesn't arise from accumulating what the world promises is necessary. True abundance is born from a connection to the source. In ancient times, it was understood that material wealth was merely a reflection of a much deeper prosperity, one born from the soul. The mysticism of all the great traditions holds that the soul is a seed planted in the universe, whose task is to flourish, expand, and share its light. The eternal child, in its purity, is not afraid to create, because it lacks nothing. It does not seek to fill voids, nor does it feel incomplete. The eternal child is, in its very nature, one with the whole. Its being is a perfect reflection of universal abundance. Creation emerges with the same ease with which a child draws in the sand without premeditation or judgment. It is an act of spontaneity, of pure joy, a play without fear of failure. And that creation is not separate from abundance. They are one energy flowing through the soul. Thus, every time the soul reconnects with its essence, when it stops following the dictates of the world and opens to its own being, it begins to create in every aspect of its life. But this process requires neither effort nor sacrifice. On the contrary, the most powerful creation is that which flows naturally, like a river that advances without forcing its course. Abundance cannot be forced. It cannot be demanded. It is the inevitable result of a life lived from the heart, from the connection with the divine being that each of us carries within. The ancient alchemists knew that to transmute lead into gold, it was necessary first to work within the soul. True transmutation occurs when the soul aligns with its divine purpose, when it remembers that it is capable of creating everything it needs. It is not about changing the exterior, but rather about transforming the perception of the self, of seeing the world through the eyes of the eternal child, without fear, without judgment. In doing so, the soul begins to reflect that abundance in its material life. But, at its core, that abundance is spiritual before it is material. The soul that has forgotten its creative power sees the world as a place of lack. It seeks outside what it already possesses within. But abundance is never found outside, not in things, titles, or possessions. It is within, waiting to be acknowledged. The true creator does not seek what they do not have, but creates from what they already are. And what is divine, infinite, perfect. The eternal child knows this effortlessly. They know they need no more, because they are already complete. And from this awareness of fullness, they are able to create with the same ease with which they breathe. It is necessary, then, to shed the illusions of the world, the stories it tells us about scarcity and suffering. It is important to remember that abundance is an inherent human right, not related to merit or extraordinary efforts, but to a connection with the divinity within. Abundance is not a reward, but a natural consequence of the soul's alignment with its true purpose. Humans have been taught to believe that abundance can only be achieved through hard work, competition, or sacrifice. But this is a limited view imposed by a culture that fears the unlimited power of the soul. In the deepest truth, the soul need not fight for what is already its own. It only needs to remember its connection to Source, to the universe, to the eternal child who plays without restraint. True abundance begins when the soul stops identifying with external limitations and begins to live in the certainty that everything it needs is within it. This is one of the most profound teachings left to us by the great spiritual masters. Jesus, Buddha, the Sufi mystics, and the sages of ancient times taught us that abundance is not something acquired, but something awakened. It is not about receiving more, but about opening to what already is. By opening our heart and mind, by releasing the energy we've accumulated in our wounds and fears, we begin to create. The soul that has freed itself from anguish and doubt creates with ease, and what it creates expands into every area of its life. Relationships, work, health, everything is transformed when the soul allows itself to create from its deepest being. This process of creation is neither selfish nor isolated. When the soul aligns with its purpose, abundance is not only reflected in its personal life, but extends to everything it touches. The energy that flows from within the being touches others, uplifts them, and inspires them. True abundance is a shared force, flowing endlessly among all beings. And when the soul opens to this force, it becomes a channel through which abundance expands infinitely. It is in this state of connection and flow that the soul achieves its true freedom. It is not bound by time, space, or the limits of matter. Abundance is not merely a material aspect, but a profound spiritual experience. It is the understanding that life itself is a gift that can be experienced without reservation, without fear, without scarcity. And everything the soul needs to live its purpose is given at the right time, in the right place. The soul that has reconciled with its divine nature, that has remembered its connection to the eternal child, creates with the power of unconditional love, play, and light. And this creation is not only for itself, but for the good of all humanity. Because when one rises, all rise. The abundance of the soul is an expansive force that transforms not only the individual, but the entire world. The key is to remember that we don't need to seek what we already are. Abundance is within, waiting to be unleashed. And only when we free ourselves from the limitations of the mind, fear, and judgment can we allow ourselves to live in that infinite abundance that is our true state. Chapter 10. Eternal Youth Beyond Time. Youth is not a destiny that is lost as the years advance, nor a good that is consumed with the passage of time. Youth is an essence, a fire that burns in the heart of one's being, and knows neither the fatigue of the clock nor the relentless march of the calendar. In the deepest truth, youth does not depend on the flesh, but on the spirit. It is the vibration of the soul that never ages, even though the body changes. It is the clear gaze that sees the world with new eyes, even though the world has been repeated 1,000 times. The body, like everything on this material plane, experiences cycles. It is born, grows, ages, and eventually dissolves. But the soul, which is eternal, transcends these cycles. It is not subject to chronology or the laws that govern matter. True youth, the kind that does not end with time, is found in the soul that remembers itself, that reconciles with its primordial essence. At that moment, the soul understands that old age is only a concept of the mind, a story told to define mortality. But the immortality of being knows no wear or decay. Eternal youth dwells in every moment, in every breath, in every step we take with a full heart. It's not that the body should be ignored, nor that old age should be rejected. The body is the temple that contains the soul, and through it, we experience life. However, the soul is not defined by its physical envelope. Just as the tree of life does not fear the passing of the seasons, the soul does not fear the passing of time. The aging of the body is merely a transformation, like the falling of leaves in autumn, a stage that prepares the ground for a deeper rebirth. For, as the ancient alchemists taught, gold is only extracted from lead through fire, and it is the fire of experience that transforms the being, not what meets the naked eye. Thus, true youth is that which is unaffected by the folds of the skin or the scars of time. Eternal youth is the soul's ability to constantly renew itself, to reinvent itself again and again, unafraid of the shadows of aging. Like a river that flows without concern for origin or destination, the young soul moves with the current of life, free from ties and worries. It does not dwell on the past, nor does it anticipate the future. Its essence is the present, the eternal moment that is only experienced when one abandons the weight of the mind and opens to the purity of being. Youth is not found in what the body can do, but in what the soul can imagine, in what the heart can feel. True youth is found in the ability to keep dreaming, to keep creating, to keep playing, even when wrinkles deepen and physical strength seems to wane. True youth is the fire that burns within, the desire to continue exploring, to keep learning, to live without the chains of other people's expectations. Mystics, sages, and great spiritual masters never cease to be young in their souls. No matter how many years they lived in this world, their hearts always remained pure, unburdened by past stories, unencumbered by the rigidity of an adult mind that fears the end of the road. On the contrary, they understood that every stage of life is an opportunity to be reborn, to discover something new, something greater. Youth is not a physical state. It is a mental and spiritual state, a vibration that the soul maintains intact as it moves through time. Eternal youth is not limited to the flesh. It is reflected in a person's attitude toward life. He who refuses to succumb to fear and conformity, who continues to seek the truth, who continues to love without reservation, who continues to create from the heart, that person remains young, no matter their age. It is the soul that defines youth, not biology. Eternal youth is one who does not fear the fragility of the body, because he knows that the soul is immortal and beyond temporal forms. Some people believe that as we age, we should lose the desire to explore, to learn, to enjoy. They feel trapped by the weight of accumulated experience, as if the scars of life were an insurmountable burden. But in reality, it is in maturity that the soul can touch true youth, one that is independent of the body or external circumstances. Maturity is the point at which consciousness is freed from judgment, where the being renews itself through acceptance and detachment. It is the moment when the soul can remember its divine and eternal nature. In the most ancient traditions, there is talk of a perpetual cycle of renewal. The wise old person is not one who has lost their youth, but rather one who has achieved a new form of youth, one that is deeper, wiser, and more connected to the universe. This youth is not a stage that exhausts itself with the passing of years, but rather one that transforms. In this eternal cycle, old age becomes a portal to a deeper understanding of oneself and the cosmos. And it is in this cycle that the soul, when it connects with its primordial essence, is freed from the illusion of aging, achieving true immortality. Eternal youth is not an impossible ideal or a distant destiny. It is a reality that can be experienced here and now, when the soul remembers itself as the source of all creation, as an ever-expanding divine spark. It is the return to the eternal child who dwells deep within us, a child who plays with life without fear, who creates without limits, who connects with the universe without reservation. When the soul remembers that it is immortal, when it stops identifying with the aging of the body and opens itself to the constant flow of life, then time no longer has power over it. Youth is eternal, not because the body remains intact, but because the soul lives beyond the limits of time and is infinitely renewed, creating beauty, love, and abundance in its passage through this world. Chapter 11. The continuous rebirth of the soul. The concept of youth, as we have explored, is not bound to the confines of the flesh or the temporality of the physical being. Eternal youth is a whisper of the soul that resonates through the ages, a vibration that transcends the marks of time. But beyond the eternal youth that resides in the soul, there is another vital aspect: continuous rebirth, the constant renewal that invites us at every moment to transform our consciousness and our reality. This renewal is not just a possibility, it is a necessity inherent in the nature of being. Every day, we live as a gift from the universe, offering us rebirth. The sun rises every morning, unwavering, and with it comes the opportunity to create something new, to rediscover ourselves, to rewrite the story of our lives. Yet, too often, people get trapped in the idea that they've lived enough, that there's no more room for wonder, for exploration, for growth. Life begins to feel like a repetition, as if the cycle of days were a sentence, a meaningless routine. This vision, however, is only a veil covering the deeper truth of our existence. When the soul connects with its eternal essence, it understands that life is a process of constant rebirth. Every experience, every emotion, every thought has the power to transform the being, to turn the lead of our limitations into the gold of our wisdom and our love. Eternal youth is revealed in this process of continuous transformation, in which there is no end, only cycles of evolution. The aging of the body is but one more stage in this process. It is a moment that invites introspection and internal renewal. Imagine for a moment that each day is a seed that the soul sows in the soil of life. The seed doesn't remain fixed. It grows, adapts, transforms into something new. Eternal youth isn't static. It's an energy that renews itself with every choice, with every step we take toward the unknown, toward the unexplored. And this movement toward the new is what keeps the spark of youth alive at the heart of our being, even when wrinkles mark our skin and our hair turns gray. True youth doesn't fear change. It embraces it, because it knows that, in every change, there is an opportunity for rebirth. This rebirth does not occur only at the individual level. Just as a river is never the same, the flow of collective life is also constantly renewed. Civilizations, cultures, and societies all go through cycles of transformation, and in each collective transformation, humanity has the opportunity to experience spiritual renewal. Individual awakening and collective awakening are interconnected. The human soul, like the soul of the world, is never exhausted. It is renewed again and again, without rest, without fear. This process of constant renewal also involves surrender. It's not about clinging to the past, to the ways we once knew, and that gave us security. Attachment to the past is what prevents us from seeing the abundance of the present and the infinite potential of the future. Living with the awareness that each day is a new opportunity for rebirth allows us to let go of the weight of what has been and embrace what is to come. The past is not a burden, but a school, an accumulated experience that prepares us for new challenges of the soul. Each challenge is an invitation to discover a deeper and wiser version of ourselves. Sometimes, life presents us with what appears to be an end, a closing of a cycle. Old age, illness, loss, grief. These moments may seem like markers of an irreversible ending, but, in reality, they are thresholds toward new beginnings. The death of the body is not the end of life. It is only a transition, a transformation. The very nature of death teaches us the essence of continual renewal. The seed dies to give way to the sprout. The tree sheds its leaves to renew itself. Life is renewed in each cycle, and our soul, in its eternal youth, continues forward beyond physical forms. By opening oneself to this understanding, human beings are freed from the fear of aging and death, because they understand that, as long as the soul is alive, as long as consciousness is awake, there will never be a definitive end. Every experience, every love, every fall is just a part of the endless cycle of creation and renewal. The death of the body is not a goodbye, but a see you later, a reminder that life never stops, that the energy of creation never runs out. Eternal youth resides in the acceptance of this continuous cycle of transformation. It is not the youth of the flesh that defines the human being, but the youth of the soul, its capacity to be reborn, to reinvent itself again and again, regardless of age or stage of life. In this sense, every human being is an eternal child, always growing, always learning, always evolving. It is possible, then, to live with the awareness of this continual rebirth. We can wake up each morning with gratitude, with the certainty that today is a new day to create, to explore, to discover, to be. The soul never loses its capacity to renew itself, to flourish, to embrace life with the same energy it had when it was young. And with each step forward, there is no time, no aging, only the eternity of being that continues forward, immortal, young, renewed. Eternal youth is not an illusion, nor a fantasy. It is a reality experienced every day, in every breath, in every conscious action. It is the ability to keep your heart open to the wonder of the moment, to continue dreaming and creating, no matter how many years pass. Eternal youth is a state of mind, not an age. And those who understand this will always live in the radiant summer of their own being, no matter how far they have come along the path of time. Chapter 12. The Art of Living Without Fear. Fear is the shadow that follows human beings, a companion that hides in every corner of our consciousness. It tells us we are not enough, that the path is uncertain, that the unknown awaits us with cold hands and dark eyes. And yet, fear is only an illusion, a construct of the mind that binds us to a past that no longer exists, to a future that has yet to arrive. Life, in its pure essence, knows no fear. Life is the force that unfolds without reservation, the wind that caresses the mountain, the river that flows without stopping. Fear is the paralysis that halts that fluidity, that constant vibration that calls us to be who we truly are. The art of living without fear is the art of aligning with the truth that lies deep within the soul. It is the act of recognizing that fear is nothing more than a disguise the mind places over love, over the certainty that everything is part of a divine order. Life is not a battlefield where every step is a struggle. On the contrary, life is a subtle dance, a dance that invites us to flow, to move gracefully, to be aware of the present moment. Living without fear is learning to move in harmony with that dance, accepting that uncertainty is not an enemy, but an opportunity. We've been taught to fear the unknown. We've been taught that the future is uncertain, and that, therefore, we must control every aspect of our lives, clinging to the certainties the outside world offers us. But in reality, the future isn't something we can predict or control. The future is the sum of all our present moments, all our choices, all the paths we decide to take in the here and now. There are no guarantees, no absolute certainties. But that doesn't mean we should live in fear. Fear, by its nature, is a resistance to the flow of life. It is the attempt to cling to control, to avoid the unexpected. But life itself is uncertainty. Nature teaches us this fundamental principle. The sun sets every night without knowing if it will rise again the next day. Rivers flood without warning. Seasons change without warning. Life is a constant flux, an eternal coming and going. To live without fear is to recognize that we cannot control everything that happens, but we can learn to flow with it. When we release fear, we discover that we don't need to have everything figured out, that we don't need to have answers to every question. Fear makes us think we must know everything, that we must be prepared for everything. But in reality, the greatest wisdom lies in the ability to live with uncertainty, to embrace the mystery of existence. By releasing fear, we free ourselves from the need to control and the pressure to be perfect. Only then can we live at peace with ourselves and with the universe. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Courage is not someone who is not afraid, but someone who moves forward despite any feelings of insecurity they may experience. Courage is someone who decides to live fully, despite the doubts and fears that arise in their hearts. Courage is the willingness to embrace the unknown, to leap into the void with the faith that the soul will be guided by the inner light that is always present, even in the deepest darkness. Living without fear doesn't mean being reckless or launching into adventures without caution. Living without fear is living with confidence, with the certainty that, no matter what happens, one always has the capacity to adapt, to learn, and to find a way forward. It's living with an open heart that allows us to welcome both moments of joy and sorrow, without being overwhelmed or paralyzed by either. Life is a constant balance, and fear is the imbalance that prevents us from finding it. The great masters of humanity, those who have left an immortal legacy, have been men and women who lived without fear. It's not that they didn't feel fear, but that they knew how to transcend it. When Mahatma Gandhi confronted the British Empire with his non-violent struggle, It wasn't because he didn't feel fear, but because he understood that fear would only lead him to surrender. Instead of running away from fear, he chose to face it with peace, love, and unwavering determination. In the same way, when Buddha sat under the tree of wisdom, he faced the inner demons that represented his fears and didn't allow any of them to deviate him from his path to enlightenment. To live without fear is to understand that fear is not something to be afraid of. Fear is only an emotion, an energy that, when observed without identification, loses its power. True strength lies in the ability to observe fear, to feel it without being consumed by it, to embrace it as a natural part of the human experience. By integrating fear, by understanding it, we realize that there is actually nothing to fear. Because ultimately, fear arises when we identify with the ego, with the limited idea of who we are. But the soul, in its infinite wisdom, knows that there is no real threat that can end it. Life, when lived without fear, becomes an act of constant love. It is the love that extends into the unknown, into the uncertain, without reservation, without defense. It is the love that flows with the same ease with which a river follows its course. Love does not stop in the face of fear, but transforms it. And it is in this love, in this full acceptance of life as it is, that we find true freedom. Living without fear is the art of being present, of accepting each moment as it comes, with everything it brings. It is the profound understanding that every experience, even the most difficult, has a divine purpose. Fear is not something we should eliminate, but something we must transform through awareness, acceptance, and love. Only then will we be truly free, and in that freedom, life becomes a constant celebration. Chapter 13. The Wind of Eternal Youth. In the silent corner of the cosmos, where the stars forget to shine and the winds are nothing more than whispers of the soul's memories, it is said that true man finds youth not in accumulation, but in dispossession. This ancient wisdom was forgotten by many, buried in Renaissance translations, but it never completely faded, for he who seeks in silence finds the eternal. The ancients knew that rejuvenation is not a process of addition, but of purification. The body is renewed not by the accumulation of new elements, but by the emptying of excess, by returning to a primordial state. True youth is not found in what is gained, but in what is lost, in what is released. The soul, freed from the shadows of the mind, returns to its original geometry, that perfect and eternal structure that cannot be corrupted by the passage of time. And it is in this profound silence, where the mind is silent and the heart listens, that the soul blossoms. Silence, far from being an absence, becomes a vibration of pure presence. The soul, in its silent abode, needs no words, for it knows that truth lies in what is left unspoken. Emptiness is its home, and in that emptiness, youth springs forth effortlessly. In certain meditation traditions, such as those taught by the ancient Tibetan sages, there is talk of the practice of objectless emptiness. This emptiness doesn't seek to fill a space, but rather to empty oneself of all that is not essential. It is not an emptiness of escape, but an emptiness of return. A return to the primordial, to what has never been lost, to what has always been there, beyond time and suffering. It is in this space, where the soul finds itself, that eternal youth is revealed. In the visions of ancient prophets, such as Ezekiel, before the divine word was heard, there was first absolute silence. Isaiah fell silent before receiving the vision of the seraph, and Ezekiel was led to a field of dry bones, where the wind of the Spirit whispered to him in total silence. It was in this emptiness that light first shone, for true light comes not from noise, but from the silence that precedes it. Today, in a world saturated with voices and hurried thoughts, a young soul will not be recognized by what it says, but by how it inhabits silence. The person who rejuvenates is not the one who fills themselves with activity and noise, but the one who learns to pause, not to flee from the world, but to return to their center, to their essence. Silence, then, is not the absence of sound, but the pure presence of being. True silence isn't the outer emptiness that may surround us, but the inner space untouched by the years or the opinions of others. It's that secret sanctuary that dwells deep within us, a place where youth doesn't need to be explained, because it simply is. And when one manages to remain in this space, even for a moment, something within aligns, not with the world around us, but with the eternal principle. The face becomes clearer, the gaze broader, and the body feels lighter. Not because anything has been added, but because the noise has disappeared, and what remains is the essential, the intact vibration of the soul, which has never aged, having only been hidden beneath the noise of the world. So, when time overwhelms you, when you feel the passage of time begin to devour you, don't seek to do more. Do less. Don't speak. Don't think. Sit in silence and listen. Listen to the whisper of your soul, which breathes behind your name. Because in that timeless space, youth isn't requested, it's remembered. It's like a seed waiting to be unearthed, like a distant echo asking to be heard. Youth is not found in what you acquire, but in what you remember. True abundance is not found in what lies outside of you, but in what dwells within your deepest being. The young soul, the one that never ages, is the one that knows how to inhabit silence, how to connect with the primordial vibration that gives you life, not through what you add, but through what you let go. The true alchemy of rejuvenation is not that which occurs in the laboratory or in the secret formulas of alchemists, but that which happens in the fire of the soul. The inner fire that transmutes everything it touches. The body, when sustained by a pure consciousness, regenerates itself even in the midst of difficulties, in the midst of storms. It is not the body that ages, it is the mind that forgets its true nature. Remember then, that true youth is not in the things you acquire, but in the emptiness you create. Don't look outside for what can only be found within you, because when the soul connects with its purest essence, when the inner vibration aligns with universal truth, time ceases to have power over you. And in that moment, not only is your body rejuvenated, but your soul recognizes itself, beyond the limits of time, in its original purity. Chapter 14. The Inner Heat of Eternal Youth. It is not the whisper of external norms that shapes the soul, but the fire that burns at its center, an invisible heat that calls the body to blossom. And so, in the silent dance of the universe, the soul knows that its renewal depends not on the outside, but on internal reconciliation, on the stillness that allows the body to remember what it already is, immortal. And you, who have reached this moment, know what eyes have not yet been able to see. You sense it deep within your being. Youth is not found in bottles or in formulas on the market. It does not reside in what is bought or in what is achieved with effort. Youth is revealed in the gaze that ceases to see the body as an enemy. That gaze, subtle and wise, begins to transform the old myth of aging. For when the soul believes, transformation no longer requires miracles. The elixir of life flows, not in drops, but in light, not as an external act, but as an internal coherence. The soul never needed rejuvenation. It only needed to be recognized in its truth, to be believed in its original purity. And when that belief becomes vibration, when energy flows without friction, everything that seemed to be in decline is renewed in its essence. The body becomes a perfect reflection of consciousness, an instrument that dances with the soul, not a simple clock marking the passage of time. True wear and tear doesn't come from physical aging, but from the acceptance of an imposed narrative, a story that says everything has an inevitable end. The disease of time isn't an ailment of the flesh, but a poison of the mind, a deeply rooted idea that's assumed to be natural. The belief in decay, in the inevitable wear and tear of the physical, is what rots the soul. And no one dares to question it, because it's called maturing, celebrated as growth, and accepted as a destiny that cannot be challenged. However, the body, in its original state, is not designed to succumb to that logic. We age not according to the world's calendar, but according to our idea of it. True wear and tear, true aging, is born from faithfulness to the narrative of linear time, the one that tells us that everything is moving toward decay, and that any attempt to stop it is arrogance. But what is not said, what is hidden, is that this very idea is what fuels wear and tear. Time, more than a physical reality, is an emotional programming, a spell installed in our perception. In ancient Toltec wisdom, before modern eyes interpreted its teachings, there was talk of the timeless Nahual, a state of pure consciousness, free from the shackles of time, where the warrior of the spirit could operate from eternity, free from the chains of the calendar. The body, according to the shamans of the highlands, does not respond to the passing of time, but rather to the assemblage point of consciousness. If that consciousness remains within the illusion of time, the body wears out. But if it is transferred to the Nahual, to the space where time does not exist, the body becomes like the wind, free, light, immeasurable. The Nahual is neither a place nor a god. It is a frequency, a consciousness that remembers that it is not subject to deterioration, because it was never matter, but vibration. Form only appears when someone observes it with fear, when the fear of the passage of time gives it substance. And in other traditions, although distant in their roots, we find echoes of this same truth. In the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, the patriarch does not ascend geographically, but rather transits toward a space of non-temporality, a place where faces do not change, because light is their nourishment. Thus, eternal youth is not a prize won by a few, but a natural consequence of living outside the flow of artificial time. The disease of time lies not in the body, but in the forgetting of our position outside of it. When we forget that the soul is ageless, the body reflects that disconnection. It becomes rigid, heavy, limited by the belief that there is only one direction, down. Time, in reality, is not a river that drags us toward oblivion. It is rather a fabric we weave with the consciousness we inhabit. If we weave from fear, nostalgia, or anxiety about the future, the fabric wears and ages. But if we weave from the full present, the fabric becomes luminous, flexible, incorruptible. Wise people do not measure years, but rather the intensity of consciousness, the degree of presence in which they live. In esoteric circles, linked to forgotten traditions, it was said that the body does not accumulate years, but rather densities. And the soul should not ask itself how many years it has lived, but how much of its eternity it has remembered. Because the true illness of time is a spell, an enchantment sustained by repetition. Clocks, birthdays, wrinkles, cliches. Each of these elements, separately, seems innocent, but together, they form an invisible prison that binds us to the idea of our transience. Yet there are cracks in this prison. Moments when the programming fails, a profound contemplation, a connection with the inner child that still resides in the center of the chest, an intuition that tells us, without words, that we have not yet truly begun to live. These glimpses are not accidents. They are the voice of the Nahual, the whisper of celestial memory, the soul pushing from within to be acknowledged. The body, like the soul, has its own language, rhythm. When rhythm is imposed from outside, by work, goals, schedules, it becomes unnatural. But when rhythm is born from silence, when it adjusts to the time of the spirit, the body begins to vibrate differently. In that rhythm, aging loses meaning. not because the biological aspect disappears, but because it ceases to be the center of our experience. Time only sickens when we believe in it as an end. But if we see it as a means, as an illusion that organizes the dance of form, it ceases to dominate us. And then, the soul can breathe without counting the size, can love without measuring the years, can look at its face without looking for signs of decline. Because the calendar no longer defines it. Only its ability to remain present beyond counting is what defines it. And perhaps this is the greatest act of spiritual health. To stop wondering how much time we have left and start wondering how much eternity we have yet to unfold. The soul that awakens to its timelessness doesn't stop the clock. It transcends it. And in doing so, it stops getting sick. Not because it denies the world, but because it has remembered that it never belonged to it. Before continuing with the video, if you want, the truth of youth is in this forbidden book. I recommend you look at the first link in the description. Chapter 15, The Eternal Geometry of the Face. In the vast fabric of existence, time presents itself as a tangle that ties every thought, every action, every emotion to the linear flow of becoming. Daytime reality, which draws us into its constant dance of cause and effect, is anchored in the perception of the clock, in the inevitable wear and tear of the body that, day after day, seems to fade away. However, the dream world offers a sacred refuge, a space where the soul is freed from the shackles of time and bodily narrative. There, in the realm of dreams, one can soar without limits, change shape, appear nameless, exist without justification. These are not whims of the imagination, but manifestations of the true nature of being, that which remains hidden beneath the layers of material reality. Sleep is not an illusion. It is a profound truth that wakefulness fails to sustain. In the ancient Vedantic texts, particularly in the commentaries attributed to the sage Bodhipada, there is mention of a luminous presence, unchanging in the face of the phases of the mind. Sakshi, the incorruptible witness. This entity is unaffected by the three states of being, wakefulness, dream, and deep sleep, for it is unborn, unaged, and undying. The witness is the very essence of being, pure consciousness that remains awake even when all else sleeps. In the dream state, this essence manifests with complete freedom, not because it acquires greater power, but because the constraints of time have been suspended. When we dream, we don't wonder how old we are, nor do we feel the weight of our body as a prison. In dreams, we laugh, cry, travel, and remember worlds that never existed, because in that state, the soul is not limited by the form of the character. It is simply presence. The ancients of Tibet, in their wisdom that predates Buddhism itself, spoke of Milam, the yoga of sleep, not as a psychological technique, but as a vehicle for spiritual restoration. In the secret texts of their tradition, they mentioned the veiled practice of remaining conscious in sleep, not to control it, but to remember the light of the body. They taught that if one managed to recognize oneself within the dream without identifying with the dream form, the soul began to shed the memory of aging. Because the body does not wear out in sleep, unless we believe otherwise. These sages didn't speak in metaphors. Advanced practitioners held that one who dreamed lucidly from the heart, not from the ego, began to alter their waking vibration, and with that, the body responded. Ailments eased, skin cleared, the voice returned to its original tone. It wasn't a placebo effect, but a coherence between worlds. Modern science, though still fearful of touching this mystery, has begun to intuit it, speaking of the phases of REM sleep, of alpha and delta brain states, of deep rest. But it resists naming the obvious, that sleep is a spiritual act, that each night, the soul travels not only to replenish energy, but to momentarily free itself from the script of time, and that what happens there can shape matter here. It is no coincidence that great sages were visited in dreams, that prophets received visions while they slept, that initiates spent entire nights in closed taverns, not to isolate themselves from the world, but to enter the true world. In the Eleusinian mysteries, initiates did not eat or speak before sleeping in the dark sanctuary. They knew that by crossing the threshold of sleep with a willing consciousness, they could bring with them wisdom and a new vibratory structure. If the body is vibration, why would it not be rejuvenated when touched by a pure image, dreamed from the soul? Not an image constructed by desire, but a vision arising from the very center of being. The sages knew it, the Vedics knew it, the ancient mystics knew it. Sleep is a clear mirror where eternity is remembered without interference. The problem isn't that we dream little, it's that we don't appreciate what the soul does when the ego sleeps. We wake up and mock sleep. We forget it, we ignore it. Thus, night after night, we waste the opportunity to connect with that dimension where we have not yet aged, where the body is a light contour that obeys the heart and not the calendar. But it only takes a moment of lucid recollection, a moment in which the dreamer recognizes themselves, for something to begin to reconfigure. It's not magic, it's resonance. Because the soul that remembers itself in dreams begins to sound different during the day. And that, over time, transforms everything. The true self doesn't age because of biology, but because of the repetition of a mistaken image. Perhaps this is the secret door the soul has been waiting for. It doesn't need complicated techniques, years of discipline, or miracles. It only needs you to let it dream freely, not to escape the world, but to remember it as it was conceived. A game without measure, a canvas without time, a breath without age. So, when you close your eyes tonight, don't close them just to rest. Close your eyes to cross over. Cross over to the place where the soul never forgot its shape, and let it teach you, once again, that you were never old. You only dreamed you were. Chapter 16. The Breath of Eternity. There is an act so mundane, so imperceptible, that it is rarely granted the power it truly possesses. We perform it without thought, without intention, without awareness of its depth. And yet, in that act lies the most ancient and direct key to reconnecting with eternity. That act is breathing. I'm not talking about biological breathing, which, without our realizing it, keeps the physical body running. I'm talking about conscious breathing, the kind that dissolves time, that doesn't drift along with the current of the past or anticipate the future, but rather inhabits the present like a bridge connecting the visible with the invisible, the mortal with the immortal. Breathing as if you've never aged is not a mental exercise, not a simple attempt to cling to yesterday, but a profound affirmation that penetrates the innermost core of one's being. Breathing consciously is an act as simple as exhaling and inhaling, yet so transformative that it can dismantle the very structure of time and restore the original vibrational geometry of one's being. Each conscious breath is like a tiny spark of eternity that awakens the dormant soul. In the deepest and least known teachings, such as those of the Nata lineage, one of the oldest in Tantrism, there is talk of Subarna Prana, the golden prana. This is not the air the physical body breathes, but an ethereal substance that only moves when consciousness invokes it. Golden prana cannot be inhaled without mindfulness. It's not just about breathing, but how we do it, with presence, without haste, without judgment. And when we do it, something within us reorganizes, regenerates. The sages of this lineage held that every human being carries within them a reservoir of eternity contained within their breath. From the moment we are born, we are given a precise number of breaths. However, when we breathe with full awareness, slowly, and with absolute attention. That number becomes infinite, because what matters is not the number of breaths, but the quality of the awareness that sustains them. This concept is not exclusive to the East. In the Rosicrucian lineage, in the 10th century teachings, there was talk of a breathing that was not limited to oxygenating, but illuminating. In ancient texts, one of Michael Mere's anonymous disciples described a practice that consisted of exhaling with the image of expelling accumulated years and breathing as if we were being born again, with no memory of what we had been. The idea was to dissolve aging, not from the body, but from the breath. Although these practices did not survive the rationalist movement, their echo persists in sealed texts that still circulate in discrete circles. It is not time that wrinkles the skin, but forgetting how to breathe with wonder, says an ancient text. This phrase holds a profound secret in its simplicity, because breathing, when conscious, is not just an exchange of gases. It is an alchemical act that restores order, that reconfigures matter, that brings with it the light of origin. Tibetan yogis speak of the rainbow body, the symbol of supreme realization, and affirm that it is not built through complicated practices, but through a single, genuinely pure inhalation. A breath held with such truth that the body recognizes its essence beyond time. This is not a myth or an unattainable theory. It is a possibility within everyone's reach. It doesn't require years of retreat or extreme discipline, just stopping the world for a moment, closing your eyes, and breathing as if you've never aged. Breathing as if the first breath of your life still resonates within you. And if you do this, even if not immediately, something irreversible happens. The heart rate changes, the tension dissolves, and most importantly, the soul begins to take its place. Not as an abstract idea, but as a living presence, like a fire burning from the depths of your being. The body then begins to respond, not to the years that have passed, but to the eternity that inhabits it. The true act of rejuvenation doesn't begin with a treatment or a fleeting emotion. It begins with breath, that breath that carries with it not history, but the light of origin. That breath that doesn't ask how old you are, but how much truth you are willing to breathe. Because when that truth enters you, everything else is reorganized. Time dissolves, not with theories or complicated thoughts, but with a breath so deep and conscious that the soul finally remembers it's alive. Chapter 17. The consciousness that rewrites the body. The flesh is neither mute, nor blind, nor deaf. It is a sensitive, obedient, and malleable material. But it does not respond to whims or superficial desires. It does not yield to scattered thoughts. It only responds to certainty, to that silent certainty that needs no arguments or justifications, a certainty that vibrates so deeply, so densely, that it is capable of transforming itself into form. The body, though seemingly inert to the impulses of the soul, is much more than a simple shell of bones and skin. It is the most intimate mirror of sustained thought. It is a text, a poem written from within, through the internal vibration that gives it form. And what we call visualization is not a mere imagination or desire, but an energetic writing traced on that internal surface. Whoever knows how to write on their body with full awakened awareness, whoever knows how to rewrite forms from certainty, that being regenerates their matter, transforms it into something new. Matter has no autonomy. It is obedient to the vibration that commands it. Everything we perceive as physical, bones, skin, organs, wrinkles, is essentially a repeated story. It has been repeated so many times that it has become substance. Form is nothing more than the echo of the frequency that has been persistently maintained. Just as music becomes melody by repeating a harmonic pattern, so too the body is shaped by the thoughts that maintain its vibration as its center. The principle of correspondence, which has survived through the centuries, tells us clearly, as within, so without. As is the thought, so is the form. This axiom is not simply a metaphysical phrase, but an operational formula that governs all real transformation. Deep visualization is not about creating images that contradict experience. It is about allowing experience itself to be reconfigured from its roots, from its inner vibration. The body doesn't need to be forced to change. It needs to be informed that the soul has remembered a higher image of itself. Ancient sages of the Sufi tradition, such as the great George Wergi, spoke of what they called the second skin. This wasn't a symbolic concept, but a precise term to describe the vibrational field surrounding the physical body. The true body, Wergi taught, is not touched by the hands. It is beneath and above the skin. It is made of consciousness, and the physical body follows that second skin as shadow follows light. The second skin, as he called it, is an energetic matrix shaped by intention. If that intention is mechanical, the body repeats patterns. But if that intention is lucid, the body rewrites its form. The key is not to visualize with anxiety, nor to repeat empty affirmations. The key is to hold an image with certainty. And that certainty is not shouted, demonstrated, or imposed. It is a deep, formless sensation that burns in silence. When you visualize your body with certainty, not as you want to see it, but as it already is in its original state, the body begins to reconfigure itself. Cells receive new instructions. The endocrine system changes its chemistry, posture adjusts, and skin clears. Not because something magical happens, but because the internal image is no longer divided. In advanced practices of inner alchemy, particularly those transmitted in Sufi circles, it was taught that visualization should be eyeless and formless. It should originate from the center of the chest, not from the rational mind. This practice, known as Tasamo Uralakwika, consisted of contemplating truth without attempting to imagine it. The initiate was instructed to hold the perception of their body as a vessel of light, not with attachment, but with reverence. It didn't matter what the external mirror showed. What mattered was what the soul held as a vibratory image. It was said that if one could maintain that image uninterruptedly for a single day, the form would respond visibly. However, the modern world has ridiculed the power of visualization, relegating it to simple motivational exercises or the realm of autosuggestion. But it's not about convincing the mind. It's about reconfiguring the base vibration from which the mind and body are projected. A visualization sustained from the highest identity doesn't imagine a change, it establishes it. And when that happens, the body can no longer sustain the old form. The testimonies of profound transformation come not from those who strongly desire, but from those who have clearly remembered. The body responds to the strongest image it receives. And if that image is filled with memories, traumas, and old inherited ideas about aging, the body will continue to decline. But if that image is replaced by a pure vibration, revealed from within, the body begins to obey this new internal geometry. This geometry doesn't come from the external world, but is remembered from within, from a primordial place. There is a form of the soul that precedes the body, a unique vibratory ratio, intact and uncorrupted. When contemplated in silence, not as a mental image, but as an internal pulse, consciousness aligns with that form. And in doing so, the second skin begins to glow. The light doesn't come from outside. It comes from the internal agreement between the held image and the real identity. This isn't an act of appearance control. It's an act of spiritual fidelity. It's ceasing to obey the images the world has imposed on the body, that of the body as a machine, a trap, a clock. It's beginning to see the body as what it truly is, a perfect expression of an ageless consciousness. Visualization, then, becomes a living prayer. Nothing is asked. What is affirmed is eternal. And when that affirmation is sincere, it transforms everything. It doesn't require years, complex techniques, or proof. It only requires an image sustained by the deepest truth, that the body was designed to reflect the soul, not fear. And when the soul remembers itself eternal, the body can no longer pretend it is transient. It gradually becomes what it always was, a garment of fire, a form obedient to the spirit, ageless skin. If you have come this far, it is because you want to learn more about the truth of youth is in this forbidden book. If so, I recommend that you look at the first link in the description. Chapter 19. The Silent Wisdom of Being. While everything on the surface of existence changes, there is something within you that remains unchanged. Days pass. Seasons dance with their ritual of transformation. The body bends, the skin wrinkles, the voice changes its tone. Memories fade, rusting with the passage of time. And yet, in the deep silence of your being, there is an intact presence that observes, but does not intervene. This presence, which has always been there, like an eternal and beginningless source, is not subject to the whims of time or the fluctuations of the material world. It has no form or name, yet it encompasses everything. It is the silent witness that observes the birth and death of every thought, every emotion, every form that appears and disappears in the vast fabric of existence. This witness does not age, does not fade, does not move. It does not participate in the theater of life. It simply observes. It is the all-seeing inner eye, which is not limited to appearances, but observes the underlying reality. This presence is unaffected by external changes. It is the essence of consciousness that underlies everything. From the first moments a being begins to become aware of itself, this presence is its constant companion. It cannot be touched with the hands or the eyes, because it is more than a physical entity. It is the very essence of being, that divine spark that lies beyond the body, beyond the mind, beyond any form that may appear on the surface of reality. It is the witness that has always been there and has never been touched by the passage of time. As we move through life, the body experiences wear and tear. The mind accumulates memories, and consciousness seems to fragment. But this witness remains intact. It does not participate in life's drama, neither in its joys nor in its tragedies, because it knows that everything is transitory. Everything that is form is ultimately impermanent. Form changes, but the consciousness that observes that form remains the same, unchanged. It is in this witness that true peace resides, the serenity unaffected by the waves of life. When one connects with this presence, one realizes there is no need to cling to what changes, because what truly matters is what remains. Everything else is merely fleeting illusions, like clouds that quickly pass across the sky, leaving no trace. The witness is not isolated or separated from life. On the contrary, he is life itself in its purest form. He has no need to seek peace, because he already has it. He has no need to find the truth, because he already possesses it. The wisdom of this witness is not found in books or words, but in the profound stillness of consciousness that recognizes itself. And this is where we find the turning point on the path of transformation. Because when one connects with the inner witness, the being realizes that it is not the body, not the mind, not the personal history one has accumulated throughout one's life. Ultimately, one is neither the image one projects, nor the labels one has received, but that unchanging presence that observes everything with love and compassion. When you recognize this, everything that once seemed important loses its power. Worries, fears, anxieties, expectations, all of that dissolves in the light of witnessing. And what remains is profound peace, a peace that nothing and no one can take away. The body may age, the mind may become confused, but the witness remains always young, always clean, always in its original state. The being who observes recognizes itself in its entirety, beyond the limitations of the physical body, beyond the limitations of the human mind. This is the secret of true transformation, connecting with that deep, eternal presence already within you. It's not about changing your body through mechanical exercises or convincing your mind that everything is perfect. It's about remembering who you really are, the witness who observes everything, the soul untouched by time. When you remember yourself in this way, the outside world ceases to be a place of suffering. Everything becomes a perfect manifestation of pure consciousness. It is a profound journey, a journey inward, where the answers are not found in the external world, but in the deep space of being. Here, power lies not in what is seen, but in what is unseen. And it is in this revelation that true abundance is found. Because abundance is not just a matter of money or material goods, but of the infinite peace that arises from recognizing the truth of being. If you wish to continue exploring this path toward abundance, toward true peace and transformation, I invite you to join our learning community, where we discover together the keys to reprogramming our mind and body from the deepest consciousness. Our Wealth Collection channel is a space designed for those who wish to transform their lives on all levels: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. There, we explore the metaphysical principles that govern abundance and how we can apply them to achieve a full and rich life in every sense. It's not just about acquiring more, but about learning to connect with what's already within you. I invite you to subscribe to our channel, where we share guided meditations, profound teachings, and daily practices to help you rewrite your story and manifest the abundance that is your divine right. Transformation is within your reach. You just need to open yourself to it and remember the truth that dwells within you. Subscribe now and begin your journey toward true wealth, the kind that comes from within.